I've been here, well actually, I've been in the UK since the 27th of August, but we didn't actually get to Chester till about the 2nd or the 3rd. I think that's when we actually arrived here. My background is actually publishing, so in terms of why do I write, it's because I've actually always been in a publishing environment. I've always been fascinated by it. And where I came from really was from a sense of publishing. I wanted to create my own business, and it was an overriding desire. It wasn't a desire to be unreasonably wealthy, but I was very happy for that to happen too. And I think my position now is that I'm not unreasonably wealthy. I haven't achieved that. What I've experienced is a 10-year process of building a business from a back bedroom in a house in London, with £2,000 invested, half of mine, half of my partner's, to achieving a business which had an informal offer in 2007 of 12 million, and we ceased trading on the 11th of August this summer. So I've done both sides of the process. I've been up and I've been down, and I think actually I've learned more on the way down than I have on the way up. The business started, and I hope this is the only one, it started in 1999, so it would have been 10 years old in about a month's time. But the experience of going down in a way is curiously almost more interesting. So to some extent, I know you were coming to see Rob Lloyd today, and I had a look at him online, and I saw he's written a book as well, and I saw that he undoubtedly is a millionaire or has made significant amount of money. So he's ahead of me on the money for sure. He's got a lot more hair than I have, but I reckon I'm a year younger, so I'm still in the game on that one. And I think the reflection is, my reflection is why am I an entrepreneur? Why don't I, for instance, go back into my profession and get a well-paid job? There are lots of reasons why I might do that. The first is that my wife and younger daughter are still in Spain. I'm here with my elder daughter. Instead of living in the kind of house and place that we used to live in, we currently live in a small, very nice, but very small cottage just by the centre of Chester. Fairly radical change of lifestyle, and my wife is not with me, my youngest daughter is not with us. We've split the family up to do this. So I know one of the questions is, what sacrifices have you made? But it is about choosing what you want. And, Susanna, my wife, and I had lots of conversations about, look, should you just go and take a job? If you had a job, then the company would move you. They'd sort out the tax affairs. We, of course, I was living in Spain. The main company was based in the UK. Therefore, I had to have a Spanish tax structure in order to earn the money back. We also ran a Spanish business in the Spanish language. Wonderfully complex. And the only person who could resolve it was ourselves. So in a way, the question was, why don't we give this up, stop being an entrepreneur, and go and get a job? And the reality is I haven't, and the reality is I don't think I'm ever going to be employable again. I was an employee. I went to university, I studied philosophy, which was a strange thing to do. There were about 10 or 12 of us studying philosophy in the whole of a year, which I guess was about 1,500, 2,000. So that was a slightly strange path. And I think I've ever since taken slightly strange paths. And one of the things I learned from a guy called Wittgenstein, a very famous philosopher, one of his sayings was, philosophically, go the bloody hard way. And that has stuck with me. And I don't know if it's because I thought it's good to follow it or because it's kind of come and hit me every time. I said, Neil, look what you're doing. You're actually going the hard way. It is the harder way, but it was what I wanted to do. I think really for two reasons. The first was when I met my wife, we got married, we had children very quickly. I was working at The Economist. I was working in the information publishing division, and I was flying to New York and Hong Kong and occasionally going to London. That was great before I met my wife, but when we had a family, my priorities changed, and our priorities became our priorities. They changed too. I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to have that kind of life. So that was the first reason. The second is I recognized that the really interesting jobs, having worked from the late 80s through publishing, which is directory publishing, was quite a gritty, tough sort of business. It's not the glamorous, you know, selling advertising, media, nice shiny offices. No, we were in the grubby offices. We weren't in the centre of London. We were in the sort of the bits you wouldn't really want to be seen in when it's dark.
Slough.
I think they have a lot of moving out to Slough, yeah. And it was this case of, well, what, you know, what do you actually want to do? Do you want that kind of corporate life, or do you want a different life? And my wife actually had a business. She had an entrepreneurial business. She actually had a network marketing business. And I left my safe, secure job to come and sort of run the distribution of a region for that company, and also help her as, you know, we had one baby, then another. So, you know, her time was split between bottles for the baby and phone calls. But we wanted that life, actually. And the reason that I didn't stay within, if you like, the safety of a network marketing business or, you know, franchise business, which are sort of, if you like, set up structures that you can tap into and you can bring your skills, but 80% of the mess, the confusion, the IT projects, the systems, the accounting, all that process is handled by somebody else. The reason I left that was because I just wanted to have my own business. And, you know, you should be careful of what you wish for, because it might come true. I think the first thing I'd say is the worst kind of business to have at the moment is one created in a boom, but readjusting to a whatever it is we have, a bust, a crash, a double dip recession, whatever you call it. If you're actually starting now, you have an advantage. You don't have the legacy. You don't have the liability. You don't have, well, actually, you probably do still have unrealistic employee expectations. And the piece of advice I would say is never employ someone. I saw what happened on the way down. We had two types of employees. We had two types of people working for the business. We had those people who were on a contractual basis and those people who were on an employee basis. It happened in Spain and it happened in the UK. There's no cultural difference here. It's human nature. What happens is that as a business moves closer and closer to the brink, those people who've built up a long legacy of having worked see that they are owed 6, 8, 4, 12, 15,000 pounds redundancy. Their incentive is to make sure they get the redundancy, and that becomes the priority. They don't do it in a mean-spirited way, but it's everybody looks inward. I've got to protect myself. What am I going to do here? Your contractors who earn because, you know, earn on a monthly basis or earn on the basis of what they've delivered, they think, I have to work harder because I can't afford to lose this client. This is an important client. I will work harder for that client. I will adjust my rates of pay. I will work a weekend. And we had a very definite split. I'll never forget the experience of when we effectively closed the Spanish business about a year ago, of someone who I actually trusted a great deal. I liked him. I like him now. I'd still work with him in the future. But when that idea of redundancy, finiquito means, you know, the end payment. And that's what came out. So I think the first thing is I wouldn't employ anyone. I don't think it's necessary anymore. I think the government regulations are a complete pain. And if the government really was committed to entrepreneurship, it would get rid of IR35. It would equalize the payment between what you earn as a contractor versus an employee. It would remove national insurance for the employer, and it would stimulate the growth of the freelance market. The freelance market now is unstoppable because we've gone through, you know, I experienced it coming into the job market in the late 80s. We've gone through a process where Job for Life has gone. That was broken in the early 80s, and I sort of came in on the back of that. But in the last 10, 15 years, employees have been treated very well, not always brilliantly, but generally very well, and what they've built up in terms of their rights, really, if you realize those rights at one point, nearly every company in the FTSE 100 would be insolvent. You know, if the redundancy rights were put on the table and said you have to pay those today, they wouldn't be able to meet the bills. If they had to pay the pension rights, they wouldn't meet the bills. Those companies are not technically insolvent, but you know, if you actually look at what they carry as a liability, they are. What I've learned is, 10 years down the line, my mistake was to allow those liabilities to build up quietly and secretly in the background. And again, I experienced this in Spain. In Spain, the employer's national insurance is about 32%. So you may say that in the UK, whew, wow, you know, what do we pay? 12% or something, the best part of that. Well, aren't we lucky? And that's true to a degree. But what happened was I had a business that was only a year and a half old, and people were going to get paid 4,000 euros to take the finiquito, and I was trying to persuade them to work on a freelance basis because there was still business in that business. There was still money to be earned, business to be done. And I knew that Spain was going to have the worst time of it. And it is having the worst time of it. And I felt it was I felt that it was an unwise decision of them to take the money and ignore what was there as a potential freelance basis. And some of them most of them have got jobs because they're all bilingual and therefore they're quite smart and bright. But they have really struggled in some cases. And I think that's because they get blinded by this opportunity. I accept that a lot of businesses are in a situation where they've got a business model which requires that. What I was really getting at is that I'm starting again, and if I was giving advice to someone starting again, find the business model that does not require you to have full-time employees. If the business model requires you to have full-time employees, you'll have just that problem. You pay them, you have the commitments, you have the liabilities, but hey, they can walk with your knowledge at any point. And you know, you're absolutely right. The entrepreneur is constantly trying to protect the balance between what liabilities I'm allowing to build up, secret ones, because they don't appear on the balance sheet. Yeah, they never appear there, but they are there, and they will come out and they will bite you. But on the same time, you're trying to secure your business. And I think this is the core issue, is that I would now look for a business that did not require me to do what you have to do. Okay. Second one, passion. Get passionate. First thing is, no amount of money will make you happy. Money doesn't make you happy. You've got to do something that you're passionate about and you really care about and you want to do. And the only way to survive in this market, this environment, is to be better than the next person. And that only happens when you do something that you really love, because you'll only then, you know, if you do an extra hour, hey, I still enjoy it, you know. But if it's something you don't really like, you won't. And my experience was my business drifted away from my passion. My passion was publishing, digital online publishing and all the things that did that. I launched my first Cd Rom working for another company in 1991. I remember writing the marketing material saying, this is a Cd Rom. It's like a music CD, but you put it into a separate player which can be attached to your IBM compatible computer. And that was the kind of marketing copy you had to write in 1991 for people to think, well, what is this thing? Why doesn't it play on my music?
Yeah. And the third bit?
Third bit of advice? No debt.
Right.
Debt's a drug. Debt will kill you.
No venture capital.
Okay, there are exceptions. You know, I think if you are developing a patent or a technical idea, you actually have no choice. You do go down that route. But for a graduate, yeah, because that was the question. You know, someone who's coming out thinking, great, you know, I've studied, I really want to get my hands on something. What do I do? Build something without debt. So actually get a job, start paying down your debts, and then create something that doesn't require you to have debt. Because that way you will build a business plan which works, and you can have 10 or 20 or 50 goes at it, and hey, every time you learn, you'll get closer to something that will work. You actually give yourself the freedom to learn without committing all your equity or your dad's equity or your best friends equity, or heaven forbid, get the venture capitalists involved and then start giving them bad news. The reason is when we started in '99, you know, my brother-in-law was working at the strategy for BBC Strategy, and when John Burt in those days said, write me one page, please, on what the internet is for the BBC, he was the guy that did it. Okay, so he was fascinated by what was going on. I was fascinated by it. We had another friend who kind of joined us. So in a way, we started from something that we were really interested in. But our business model, initially in the late 90s, I don't know if you know web businesses, it was all about advertising. Oh, I'll put 150 words in and I'll sell an advert for £5,000. You did. The first one you sold for 5,000 or 15. But about 6 months later, you're selling them at 500, and 6 months later, you couldn't sell them at 50. The whole idea of display advertising dissipated. It just disappeared on the web in about a year, and with that came the dot-com collapse. And we knew instinctively that advertising was not the way. Our background was not advertising. It was we were copy sales. We were marketing copy sales people, and we therefore went for content. And you could sell content online to about 2004, and then content sales collapsed. Why? Because everyone realized I put content on there, I get free leads, free marketing. It's just marketing. So their marketing budget stopped being advertising and just went into content, and then you couldn't sell the content. Now, Rupert Murdoch, bless his cotton socks, if he does what he says he'll do, he'll charge for content online, and then content publishers like us, you know, will actually be able to create models where we charge people to get access. But whether it happens or not, don't know. It'll probably morph and be different. Well, I haven't done an MBA, and given that I've sort of been away in Spain for 7 years, I haven't actually kind of been close up with business school, so I'm interested to find out the answer to that question too. What I would say an entrepreneur is looking for is, well, entrepreneurs are also investors. You know, an entrepreneur can put money and time into his own venture, or money or time or both into someone else's. So the concept of being, say, a business angel investor or an entrepreneur actually merge and very much become one. So what do those two groups want? Well, what an investor really wants, I think, is he wants to know that this entrepreneur actually has the skills and the ability to see it through. And so I think what I want to see, and part of the reason for writing this book, is I want to see an accreditation created for entrepreneurship. And I want that to be structured in a way such that business angel investors can look at that accreditation and say, look, here I've got a young 23-year-old entrepreneur, huge energy, that's great, but no experience. Right, for 80% of your business, I'll give you a small amount of money. Why? Because you're just a huge risk. I've got no problem putting some money behind you. You'll get the experience. I'm old, you know. I don't want to get, you know, I can't wait. I don't need the experience. You need the experience. So that's what you'll get from this, but you won't get the capital growth. Whereas if you look at an entrepreneur of, I don't know, 40 or 50 or 10, 15 years experience, then the relationship between the investment and the risk is very different, because you can look at the person and say, actually, they've actually experienced it. They've actually gone through the down cycle. You know, they know what it feels like to be basically beaten up, you know, bit by bit, step by step. And if you've got someone who can go through that and come out the other side, they might not be quite so cheery, or they might not be so optimistic, but actually they're probably more realistic and better able to tell you, Mr. Investor, exactly where your money is and what's happening in that business. So I think what a business school could offer those groups is getting the experience into the, you know, getting whoever's involved in that business school out into the real world, then getting that experience back in and creating some structure of accreditation so that investors can actually see that actually this is one I should back. That one I can back, but I want more equity. I think that will ease actually the ability to get relatively small amounts of money, but into entrepreneurs' pockets so they can get started. I think the concept of cycles is back in. You know, the idea of infinite, ever-ending, never-ending growth is gone. We actually have business cycles. One of my business partners who I work with and is extremely entrepreneurial, his view is that every 7 years there'll be a downturn. It takes 5 years to build a business. So he needs to start the year before this downturn ends. He needs to build it like mad for 5 years and sell it.
Know when to stop.
So, you know, from the entrepreneurial point of view, you can actually think about the cycles exist. They're not going away. That was a myth. We all fell for it. Okay, wise up. Now, the next cycle is going to happen as well. We're going to have another downturn. We may even have another downturn next week. But, you know, let's assume we get through whatever this phase is. In 7 years, there will be another downturn. Whatever you build now, you either need to sell it before that, or you need to build it to survive it. And that means dealing with the redundancy issues and therefore watching how you employ people now, because 7 years of redundancy will be an awful lot of money. I think there are two things. Part of this process for me has been kind of writing almost parables, and one of the parables I have is about a great wave and a small wave. And the great wave, you know, builds his momentum until he arrives at land. And when he arrives at land, watch what will happen. And when he arrives, he encounters, he sees this rock sticking out of the land. And he thinks, what's that rock sticking into our sea? Okay, so he chooses to hit against the rock. And the little wave watches. And the big wave takes his energy and hits the rock and hits the rock and hits the rock. And slowly but surely, there's nothing left. And the little wave thinks, I won't do that, I'll go and find somewhere easier. And he finds the sandy beach. And therefore, the little wave actually takes the sand and finds something. So I think there's this idea that you have to be persistent as an entrepreneur. I think you also need to know when to stop. You know, there's that wonderful saying of W.C. Fields of try again. Don't give in. Don't be a damn fool about it. You know, there is a point when you have to stop. And that's where we got to. You know, we had this notion of this business that was going to be a certain value. We'd had some offers. We had a 4 million turnover. We had 60 staff. We shrunk it to 12. We were going to get through this, yeah, come out the other side and rebuild it. And it came down to the decision of, look, actually, you've tried everything here. It's time to stop. And that's really the decision that we took. We tried to find the point when the staff could get paid as much or whatever they were due, where the creditors could get met, where our liabilities, which we'd built up with, you know, 2,500 apartments, which would help people buy in Central Europe, we actually able to see those investors through to complete those, or walk away if that was their choice, but to, if you like, finish it and then leave. And the reason that we did that ultimately is because we didn't believe that the business we were in was going to be one that we wanted to be in. We were all getting older, and we wanted to be in a business and a sector that had some potential, and we didn't think that that had any potential for the next 10 years. So it was, you know, that's the point when you gave up. But all the way up to that, you persist. You try this, you try that, you turn it round. We fired ourselves as directors. We put our, you know, middle managers in, you know, to give the business more impetus. We did everything we possibly could, but in the end, we gave up. Why? Because we wanted to move on. Most of the books out there say, look, you know, think and be a multimillionaire. I did it, why can't you, etc., etc. And I think actually that there are a number of distinctions. There are entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs I would define, and I would call myself a nearly successful entrepreneur, not yet where I want to be, but I would say entrepreneurs build businesses which can be sold, which they can leave, and the value continues, the business continues, okay? I think most businesses built don't survive without their founding people. So in many ways, they are a bit like self-employed jobs. You create a job for yourself. But the issue is, when you go from, we had a business with 60 people that shrunk to 12. Obviously, we had to let most of those people go, or they left on their own accord. And we then had to restructure the business. And we had to restructure it in terms of, the first thing we did is we wrote lists of stop doing lists. Okay? What are you going to stop doing? You know, suddenly you were 3 people handling all of this, and now there's 1. Okay, you can't do the work of the 3 people. What are you going to stop doing? So you had to write lists, and you actually have to force people to stop doing things. It's very strange. They got into the habit of doing these things that weren't generating any money, weren't creating any value, And you really have to help people make that step. The second thing we did is we used, there's a book that we learned quite heavily on the ideas. It's called Good to Great. And we used the concept of redefining what our business was about. And that actually was at the core of, we have to choose, and it's often just a choice. It isn't necessarily a right and a wrong. We have to choose what we're going to be about, and therefore what we're not, so we can stop doing it. Yeah, and pull our best people into that one thing. But then from that stage, you've got to start creating the vision again. You've got to create this sense of, okay, can this go somewhere? And we moved a lot of our people into positions where we were actually sharing profit, using profit share and those concepts, and trying to get them to buy, to get into the vision and to see the vision and to own it, to treat the business like it was theirs. But ultimately, that didn't stop whatever had gone on. And there came a point of recognizing it. And I think the hardest thing was that most people just did not want to recognize it. And even when we'd call it a day, they would come back and say, but why did you stop? And then the next minute they'd say, but why didn't you stop earlier? And it was extremely emotional. I think you just simply have to accept that it's going to be gut-wrenching. It is gut-wrenching, but you go through it. And I think the only way to see it, actually, the thing to take away from it is, if you build a business and you don't sell it for lots of money and it goes wrong, what do you get? Well, you get the experience of that. And that experience you can take into whatever else you do. And I think if you always approach your entrepreneur life as, so long as I get a really valuable experience, I don't care what will happen. In time, it'll just happen. And I'm not really bothered when it does, so long as I can, put food on the table and keep the home fires burning, that's okay. Then it becomes about, I just want to learn. And that's a very different attitude from the notion of, I want to be retired by the time I'm 45, which is the way in which a lot of entrepreneurship has been promoted. Also, oh, look, get rich, drive a big car, get a yacht. The last thing you want in the world, I think, is to load yourself up with liabilities. A yacht, a plane, hire the thing if you have a lot of money, but don't buy it. I just see people who, I unfortunately didn't, but people get loaded with these responsibilities. Even big houses cost a lot of money to run, even if you own it outright and don't have a mortgage. So get rid of that and be an entrepreneur because you want to be an entrepreneur and you love it, and not because, you can have shiny watches. Now, okay, it's nice to have shiny watches, but I think it's about that reality check and coming back to, why am I actually doing this? Okay. In terms of government departments, I'd say, please, can you save the money and cut the national insurance employer's contribution? That's what will make the difference. That is what makes it easy to start again. I don't think there's a stigma with closing a business. I think that what I've learned, curiously, is that your limited company doesn't actually protect you. Okay, someone else has had that experience, but I've had, fortunately, we think we've resolved it, but I've had the experience of actually, if there's a creditor and he's owed a lot of money, and let's say you've made a modest amount of money, let's say you have a house and you own pretty much your house. Well, that's a big asset, it's worth a lot of money, they will go for it, and they might scare you, they might not have a case, but they will scare you, they will scare the living daylights out of you, to say you didn't act as a director in the proper way, therefore you are personally liable. And it's a very scary process, because you thought that you had this protection called a limited company. Don't believe it. So, I think that's something that's, it's kind of the reality check. It does come down to that at the end. And you know what? I don't even feel a great resentment for the people who put, their tough credit collecting people in front of us, because I know that their business was on the brink just as ours was, and they needed to get every penny in, and if they didn't, then I don't know who they weren't going to be able to pay. But you see what I mean? So it isn't actually, it's not necessarily a vindictive thing. It's just actually how it works. So I think that reality, and it's kind of it's the reality of You just don't let your liabilities in the business grow, which is why I wouldn't employ someone. How do you stay innovative? Okay, cut costs. You can cut costs faster, you know, as a small business. How do you cut costs? Web marketing is really cheap. You should not be paying a lot. If you are paying a lot, probably maybe you're not kind of doing it quite right. So, you know, move to those things that will cut your costs. The likes of LinkedIn, the likes of people per hour, you know, these are websites which are growing extremely rapidly. Build your network on LinkedIn. That's what I'm doing. I'm building a network of freelance people who I know, who I trust, who are professional, yeah, and I will work with those people, and I will, you know, I will pay them absolutely. And you know, if you take someone like that on, pay them on time. Don't fight for pennies. Pay them, because you really need to build the way you get trust with your freelancers is by paying them. That's why they work for you. They might like you, but no matter how much they like you, they will always leave if you don't pay them. So pay them, and pay them on time, and you know, be willing to pay whatever they ask for, or not use them. So I think build the freelance team. You know, shed your fixed costs. You then have the flexibility. It's like that story of the bamboo tree could bend further than the oak tree, so the bamboo tree was still standing after the storm. You need the flexibility. You need flexibility around cost. You don't know when your top customer is going to have his problem, or his creditors going to have his problem, not pay him. The worst thing you can do is get into this chain where someone else's problem becomes yours and you pass it on. So I think, you know, disconnecting from that is important. And then after that, in terms of innovation, I mean, the web is a great way to distribute, it's a great way to connect, it's a great way to communicate. But ultimately, excellence. Just ruthlessly search out and only accept excellence. And if you have a freelance team, you can do it. If you have employees, it's so much harder. So much more of your time goes to, well, we better have a training course. No, you should let the person go. They're the wrong person. You can't train them. Don't send your ducks to Eagle School. It's true. If they're good at that job and the business has moved on, let them go. Why don't we do that? Well, usually because we know them and we like them and we live in the same town. And yeah, it's, you know, those are all the reasons. But really, I've tried it, and you know, you get some people to move a bit, but the reality is, if they were all freelance, you would have said, you know what, you're great at what you do, but I'm not going to bother you with this hassle. And you know what, when they're freelance, they have the freedom to tell you that they don't actually like what you're now asking them to do, or they don't really want to do it, or they don't really feel they're cut out to do it. And you get a much more honest conversation. Well, look, the business is going that way, my skills don't fit it, no problem. Call me when you need me. Great, the relationships stay intact. It's this strange thing about employment where people get fixed, and it builds rigidity into the business. And I saw this, and the wind was blowing too strong and it broke it. People behave differently when they're freelance than when they're employed. That's where I begin. If you then need to have a team, let's be honest, we're in business to make money. If you need to have a team which works together, then absolutely you'll create the structure to do that. You can do this increasingly with the kind of the huddle places. You know, the technology allows you to do it. You can now share screens across Skype. I saw some software that allows you to do that. You can get that collaborative working. You can do it without everybody having to physically move to a single point. Lots and lots of people hate commuting. Is there anybody here who loves commuting? Okay. One of the problems is that you actually I want to find, and okay, it's about me here. I want to build a business on excellence, and for that I want to find the very best people, and I don't know where they will be. I could base myself here in Chester, and they might not be in the Northwest. They might be in London. Or I could base myself in London, and they might not be there. They might be in Scotland. Or they actually might be in India, or they might be in Indonesia. And I don't want the physical location to prevent me from getting the very best that I can. If I want the very best, I then have to go down that route. And you're right, then comes the question of how do I build a team and a sense of collectiveness and a sense of identity and a sense of working. And I think the answer is you can do that, and the degree to which you do it is the degree to which it makes sense to do it. For instance, if you work with journalists, most journalists are used to working in an environment where they work from home, and they wish to do that. Yeah, so they're not actually looking for a team. Some people are, and some people want to develop and have experiences, and you absolutely bring them in and bring them together. But I think it's not that you don't want to have teams or develop people. You do. I think any entrepreneur puts huge amounts of time and effort into helping their people engage with what's going on and connecting them. But you don't have to do this in the traditional way. In fact, what the view I've come to is that the successful businesses that will be started now will be businesses that leverage on the freelance structure. It's not that you can't do it the other way, but that is the old way of doing it. But there's a much more freelance, much more open, much more fluid, and we talk about open door policies and that kind of idea in businesses 20 years ago maybe. Well, if people are freelance, they can pretty much say what they want. They do. They're just more honest. They tell you how it is, and you get on with it, and you don't have the same sort of issues. And I just think many people I work with actually just prefer working in that environment, and they still have colleagues. They still have the sense of identity. But maybe we used to do shows, and what we'd find is we would bring all our people together for a particular show, and we'd all do some time on the stand, and that's where you get your team building. And I think you've got to look at the business or the environment or the institution you've got, and it will be different. But I think it's a case of where I would begin from rather than where I would end. You're absolutely right. My experience is entirely based on my experience, and feel free to take from it what you like. And you may find that in a very different sector like manufacturing, it's just different. But I think that's where the opportunity is. That is a major opportunity that the internet is creating. And if, as a manufacturer, you can leverage some or part of that, then you'll have an advantage over your competitors who don't. But absolutely, these are very personal views. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely that is happening in the background, and then it's a case of the degree to which individual businesses or institutions want to take hold of it and use it. But what it does do is it adds a certain sense of risk, because as business, running a business or owning a business, we feel more out of control. Absolutely, I get that. It feels like you don't have control because you don't know that these 6 people are going to be here on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. You feel that you don't have the control. But actually, what you have is you have a very different environment. And it's one that I think that I was certainly reluctant, and I should have moved faster in it, because we had employees and we had contractors, but I should have moved faster. Had I moved faster, the business would have been more flexible. There was a greater chance of it surviving. The way that technology is developing is that you can't create an advantage with web-based technical development. We spend a lot of money developing some very clever systems that when we stopped and looked up from our desk, we realized that some people had developed and were giving out for free. And what we realized quite quickly was that the advantage was not the writing of the technology, especially web technology, data-driven technologies, etc., but it was the ability to integrate whatever was happening out there for free quickly, and then adapt your business to it. So, for instance, nearly everything on the web, blogs, etc., many things, not everything, is being driven by a platform called WordPress. It's extremely adaptive. It's free. Every day someone adds another feature. You can have flipping books if you want. You can have whatever you want, subscribing. It's free. We spent years, in the early days, building the systems that would allow us to put content onto a website and move it off. And people like, The Economist, whom I followed, they built their own content systems, which cost them fortune, and now they have this legacy system which they have to unpick, you know, because they don't want to keep putting all the money into this system that they can now have for free. So there's a lot of technical developments out there that can drive businesses. My own experience is that towards the end of you know, our activities, my partners were increasingly not wanting to actually kind of work to find and source properties that people would then actually buy and invest, but they were trying to move up the chain, if you like, and they were moving to the point where the land was being purchased and the developer was raising finance. Okay, so basically what was happening was, this in Romania in particular, the developer would have an option to buy a piece of land, and he would know what it would cost him to construct. The price of concrete had probably doubled the previous year, the steel, you know, 2007, everything, his construction and in fact his employment costs were going through the roof. And there's an example where in a then highly active market, didn't matter whether you employed people or not, your competitors were pinching your staff anyway. So you know, that didn't actually prevent it from happening. And what happened was that they would actually create these structures whereby you know, investors would put money in, and they would earn a fee for that, but also get a percentage of, you know, a certain amount of growth. Okay, so this is a very typical collective investment structure, and it's the sort of thing you see in the city all the time. Warren Buffett calls them asymmetrical incentives, which is basically heads I win, tails you lose. Yeah. If it all goes well, I, as the person who put it together, make a huge amount of money. You make some money too, but you know, I make a lot of money. And if it goes really badly, well, you lose all your money. And that asymmetrical incentive means that whoever's putting the deal together has huge incentive to take risks that you yourself would not take. And I think that Warren Buffett, I mean, Warren Buffett probably is the best investor in the world, so the best thing we can do is kind of copy him. But you know, if you look at what he says the first priority, as I understand, the first priority is to not lose money. And we don't have a city culture which is based around my first priority is to not lose money. Have you heard the other joke about the city when someone was being shown around the bankers and the yachts in, I don't know where it was, Monte Carlo or something? He said, oh yeah, you know, this banker works here and this banker works there and there's luxury yachts. He said, this is great. He said, right, where are the clients' yachts? Okay, clients didn't have any. So yeah, we do have a fundamental problem there, and I think that you know, I think finance is it's a real problem. I just don't know how to say it better than that. I know that venture capitalists are saying that the funds they have available to invest are down 70%. The government is looking to business angels to rescue them. Business angels aren't going to step into that hole. Business models just have to change. Give me a business model that doesn't require such a large amount of money up front. Give me more proof that you can make sales. Then we'll get more cash. More gradual, more step by step. And I think that if you look at what Martin Wolf, is it Martin Wolf, the economist in the FT, what he says that banking reform is not cancelled, it's just on hold. And the economy, oddly enough, it's almost horrible to say this, but it's done a bit too well. And it hasn't driven the reform through the city and the way in which finance works. And if you look at what these guys are laying out as the alternatives, they're pretty horrible, which is basically no leverage. And if you take leverage, then you reduce the amount of money available for investment by 80%. So I think it is a problem. I think the incentives are warped. And I think that you know, this whole idea of, you know, asymmetrical incentives is just dangerous. And I think if you look at something that's asymmetrical, where if it goes really well, you know, your advisor does really well, you do well, but if it all goes wrong, well, he still gets his fee, you lose all your money. That's the thing to walk away from individually. But it is right at the heart of the way that banking's been done. I think from an entrepreneurial point of view, the only way to approach this is to create value. You know, so ask yourself, what am I doing today which creates value? And in a way, this is why I like working with freelancers, and I don't work with lots of them, and I'm very loyal to the ones I work with, but I like working with them because they ask themselves that question too. And I think if you get that culture through your team or your organization, then you've got a greater chance of making it.
Yeah. Family things.
I did, yeah. I saw this one earlier. I actually wondered if it wasn't so much a sacrifice as you take things on. I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to decide what things you're going to do differently and what things you'll do the same. And you're going to upset a lot of people. And a lot of people are going to be upset with you quite a lot of the time. And if you are successful, then at the end of it, they'll just be even more upset. So I think, actually, if you take that on board, and I'm still developing my rhinoceros hide, if you develop the thick skin, then you've got a greater opportunity. Now, there's a disadvantage there because I think sensitivity and the ability to listen and hear what people don't say is what makes you see the opportunity that other people miss. Okay, but I think so. There's a sense in which you can't lack the sensitivity, but you also need the toughness. And I think as a kind of growing entrepreneur, I'm just actually learning to be tougher, and I'm actually getting quite used to the idea that many people don't agree with me, and actually being okay with that. And we can still be friends. It's not the end. It's just a difference of view. But I think you do need to know what you're about. And then absolutely stick for it. And it might turn out to be wrong, okay? And whoever was who said the opposite may be proven right. And that's okay too, as long as you learn from it. So I think there's this sense in which, you actually, it's not what you sacrifice, but it's kind of what you become. You have to be willing to become that. No, I don't think it is. I mean, my experience of watching a few entrepreneurs around me is that entrepreneurs are the best learners in the world. They're absolutely desperate to learn. They really want to listen. They think, hang on a minute, why did you say that? What do you mean by that? Where's that going? They're fascinated. A guy I work with, not university educated, doesn't have qualifications, very, very smart entrepreneur. He reads really complex business books and loves it. I mean, where do you get that mix? You get that mix from someone who's just really fascinated by where he is. And I think that fascination is what drives and creates, that's the innovation. It's don't lose your fascination. Don't lose your fascination for how people work as a team. Or not. Can you make it work with them? Not. If not, then you have to get them together. We ran our business with freelancers till 2004. Then we took an office, and then we staffed up the office. And that was a real culture shock for us and created opportunities, but also created the problems that we weren't able to solve at the end. And we did it because we were growing too fast. And quite honestly, the technology didn't really support, freelance teams of too big a size. But that technology is coming. But you do need to find other ways of doing it. So, yeah. My wife actually is entrepreneurial too, and that's important. Yeah. And curiously enough, when we were living in Spain, we chose a very traditional Spanish Castellano school for them, where they did reading, writing, arithmetic, and they did it day in, day out. They came home with their homework and they followed their planners, because we knew, Susanna and I knew, we're way too chaotic, and they've got to get that bit from someone else. We weren't going to give them that structure. And I think what we encourage our kids to do is play full out. Mm-hmm. We encourage them to go for it. Not, always, but to play full out, play the game, be in there, do it. Like you said, go for it. and be willing to fail. I think this is the key thing. Not desiring to fail, but accepting that that might be the outcome. Well, I wrote down here, entrepreneurs are not born but formed.
How early?
I don't know. My personal experience was my mum would go down the town and come back with the Financial Times and not with, Women's Weekly. My mum had me running, well, she encouraged me, and I was excited by the idea of running share portfolio, mock share portfolios with a piece of paper and a pen. So I think, to some extent, that's always been there. My parents bought a tiny little cottage in a small piece of land in Norfolk, and the first thing they did was plant potatoes, which was a really bad idea because it was a fantastic crop, and the price of potatoes collapsed. But we had tons and tons of potatoes that as an 11-year-old or 12-year-old I had to carry around, and they're really heavy, as you guys probably know. It would be much better if there'd been no potatoes that year. The price was really high, hardly any work at all, but actually it was really hard work. So I kind of guess to some extent, I've been around that. But I think it still took something to get out of a job and into being an entrepreneur, into saying I want to run my own business. And I think actually the critical factor for me was my wife. If she had not supported or encouraged it, I would never have done it. So I think, for me, she's actually probably the critical part of that and the most important bit. So without that, background and that support, I don't think you can do, well, I think you can, but it's just that much harder.